Finally, here it is. Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Man, I've been so hyped for this ever since The Force Awakens 2 years ago now. So now that I've seen it and all the hype's died down, what's my take on it? Was it worth all the hype? And how does it compare to the others? Well, I think I'll need another viewing to pinpoint how good I think it is exactly. At the moment, I think it's good, but certainly has its flaws. It's one of those films where you're coming out of the theater so pumped up, like you just saw a Star Wars movie. But once you're out of the theater and the excitement's died down, you'll remember a lot of the flaws, some actually pretty massive. But overall, I had an enjoyable experience and I definitely see it again. So for the first half, there won't be any spoilers, and when they come, I'll give a clear warning. Okay? Okay. Now for the review. So first, the positives. I love the overarching story of The Last Jedi. It's an easy movie to get drawn into because the story itself is pretty intense. The movie revolves around this epic battle between the Resistance and the First Order. The Resistance is desperately trying to survive this last stand to fight another day as the First Order desperately tries to finish them off and continue their conquest of the galaxy. So the entire movie takes place during this one standoff. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before in a Star Wars movie and is certainly unpredictable. You never know where the film's going next, so you're on the edge of your seat the entire time. As for the characters, Poe Dameron gets a lot more to do this time around as one of the Resistance's most outstanding fighters. I really like the conflict between him and Laura Dern's character. She's not a bad guy, she's a devoted member of the Resistance, but the two have different ideas for how to survive the slaughter. I thought that aspect was really cool. I also enjoyed where Rey's character went, but again, no spoilers. I've got to say, Daisy Ridley looks even more amazing. Just saying. Kylo Ren is still awesome as a conflicted antagonist, and I like his relationships with Rey and Luke. The story going on between these three is certainly the most interesting stuff in the film. Luke Skywalker is finally here for more than 5 seconds, and I thought the writers took an interesting direction with his character. He's not just some savior that Rey brings back and all is good. No, he's a broken, damaged man with so much running through his head. Although I'm upset he never got to Joker out, Mark Hamill's performance was still really good. And of course, a lot of the action was very cool too. There's nothing to compare to that Rogue One Vader scene, the Bespin fight, or the throne room scene, but it's still enjoyable and intense. There are plenty of comedic moments too, like Awakens. Not every joke lands, but enough do. Not as funny as Awakens, but still pretty good. Now, it's time for the problems, and trust me, there are a lot. Notice how out of the main cast, I didn't mention Finn? Yeah, that's for good reason. I still like his character, but all the worst stuff in Episode 8 revolves around him. Finn and his new character Rose go on this special mission on this gambling casino planet separate from all the main action, and it's just not that interesting. It's not necessarily awful and doesn't go on for that long, but their subplot feels like a drag on the rest of the film. It's also on this planet that the film tries to deliver a lot of heavy-handed commentary on war profiteering, animal cruelty, and child abuse, and none of it fits with the rest of the movie. All these big ideas are just kind of thrown in there randomly. Remove all this stuff and the overall story would still be the same. And even worse, there's this extremely forced romance between the two. It comes completely out of nowhere and is so jarring. My jaw dropped in the theater. I didn't realize I paid to see a Hallmark movie. Hopefully, it doesn't turn into a love triangle with Rey in the next one, cause I'm still on Team Finn and Rey. Even just Rose herself feels tacked on. Her character feels like a peppy teen girl going along for the ride, and again, just didn't fit with the rest of the movie. Remove her and the story stays exactly the same. She's not awful, but doesn't belong. Also, the fan service. There's way too much. Not that a little nod every now and then is bad, but when there are entire scenes devoted to fan service, yeah, it's a problem. Another major problem I have is how there are so many coincidental or in the nick of time moments. So many times from out of nowhere, someone or something comes to save the day. Maybe this happening once or twice is fine, but when it happens again and again and again, it feels really lazy and becomes eye-roll inducing. And there are characters who are just there for the sake of being there and don't serve any purpose, like Chewie, 3PO, R2, and Phasma. Something else that's been bugging me, not just about The Last Jedi, but basically everything since the originals, is the lack of Darth Vader. Vader is the most iconic figure from Star Wars, and probably the best thing about it. He's the greatest villain in all of cinema, so he casts this huge shadow over every movie without him. I know one of the main points of Awakens was how Kylo Ren is a wannabe that can never mount to Vader's greatness. I've covered that before, but simply acknowledging it doesn't make it better. Vader made Star Wars, and I miss him. I can probably keep going with all the issues, but I'll just cut it here for spoiler reasons. Although there are lots of problems, I still recommend seeing it. It's certainly worth watching. Now, this is where I'll start talking spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, I suggest you leave and come back once you have. You have been warned. Okay, so spoiler time. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of fan service, some good and some bad. Probably my favorite part in watching The Last Jedi was when Yoda's ghost showed up. I gasped. I like his role in the story, and his scene is one of the best in the movie. I love how it wasn't the distorted and boring prequel Yoda, but the tipsy, wise puppet from the original films. For the first time since '83 have we gotten to see a Yoda that actually looks and acts like Yoda. As for bad fan service, when C-3PO gives Poe the odds like an Empire, and they're the exact same odds as traversing an asteroid field, oh, that was just an eye roller. And also when R2 shows up for literally one scene, I like that he played Leia's distress signal from the original. It fit in well with the story, but besides that, he's shown for one scene and then completely forgotten about. As for Rey, I was really scared that we'd actually see her parents when she went into the cave. I was so worried that she'd be the daughter of Obi-Wan, Luke, or Han, or Qui-Gon or something, but thankfully she's not. Her parents were just two lowlives who sold their daughter for quick cash. Yeah, it's fun to speculate who's related to who, but once it's revealed, it won't be as satisfying as you thought it'd be. I prefer just having an average everyday hero, the everyman. Destiny stories have been so overdone and are inherently flawed by the fact that you already know what's going to happen to them. And it's easier to relate to an average person rising to become great instead of someone who's on a set course. So yeah, I'm glad the writers took the better route with Rey. I also love the film's theme about heroism and how we perceive legends. Luke is a great figure of the Rebel Alliance and the last remnant of the Jedi Order, but he sees himself as a failure for training Ben Solo and then attacking him, causing him to go off and become Kylo Ren. This nostalgic icon has become a broken and torn man, and he shows Poe that wars not make one great. Luke saves the Resistance by sacrificing himself to buy them time, not by going in and blowing everything up at the expense of others. I enjoyed the heck out of both their arcs, but that comes to a problem I just mentioned before. Luke coming out of nowhere at the last second to save the Resistance. There are so many of these moments. Let's just see how many I can name off the bat. When Finn and Rose get in prison, they just so happen to share a cell with the Codebreaker who instantly breaks them out. When the two get captured by the First Order and are about to be executed, it's exactly when Laura Dern's character decides to kamikaze them with the last Resistance cruiser. Then when Rose and Finn are overwhelmed by the Stormtroopers' firepower, like a few minutes later, BB-8 comes in with an AT-ST and blows up the Stormtroopers. When Finn is about to sacrifice himself, Rose comes in from out of nowhere and stops him. When the TIE Fighters are sent against the final Rebel ships, Rey comes in with the Millennium Falcon and kills them all. And finally, in the end, when Luke comes and stalls the First Order. That's 6 off the top of my head. Oh my goodness. Another thing that I couldn't mention before is this really strange scene with Leia when she uses the Force to pull herself back to the ship after being blown into space. It was a very awkward introduction to Leia using the Force. We've always known that she's Force sensitive, but just the way the scene was staged, and the fact that this is our first time seeing her actually use the Force, made it very odd. And also, how does space work here? Are the people in Star Wars able to just survive space without being torn inside out? It seems like being underwater here, where you just can't breathe, but you're fine. Leia's eyeballs should have been halfway across the galaxy. Something else that bugs me about this one is how it certainly feels more plot-driven than character-driven. The characters who we got to know and love from before just kinda get lost in the mix. They don't really drive the plot. Like in Empire, everything revolves around Vader's hunt for Luke. But here it's more about the characters surviving the battle instead of the characters growing and the conflict between them. That stuff is certainly there, but I wish the movie was more focused on it. This is especially the problem with Finn and somewhat Rey. One last thing, I wish Kylo killed Hux. It would have been awesome, like he's rising to power after killing Snoke and establishes himself as supreme leader. Killing Hux would have felt more natural and show his rise to prominence, like he doesn't need anyone else coaching him. And honestly, Hux is just an annoying person to have on the side. He has this ear-piercing yell, and I just want him to die. He's so annoying. Look, I know there's so much more to talk about in The Last Jedi, but this review's already gone on for so long, and it'll be impossible to talk about everything. So, here are my final thoughts. Walking out of the theater, I put it on par with Return of the Jedi. A great film with some flaws that I can overlook. But after thinking about it some more, it's starting to settle more on the same level as Rogue One. Heavily flawed, but still certainly enjoyable. There's a lot of good, but the problems are too big to ignore. So, those are my thoughts on The Last Jedi. Happy Life Day.